Hey everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in. My name is Jenny Duga. I'm the Executive Director of the Austin Music Foundation. We're proud to present tonight's webinar, Time to Pivot, Music Licensing, in partnership with SoundSync Music. Our host, Natalie Fan, founder of SoundSync, will join us in just a minute to talk about pitching, licensing, and composing for TV and film. First, I have just a few quick words and announcements. For those of you who are new to Austin Music Foundation, welcome. We're so happy you're here. AMF's mission is to strengthen, connect, and advance the local music industry and community. And after nearly 2 decades, we remain the only nonprofit arts service organization in Austin dedicated to providing year-round music business training and professional development free of cost. Through our impact-driven programs, which include educational webinars like these, and one-on-one mentoring, we strive to provide a better pathway to career sustainability for Austin's most talented independent music creatives. So to learn more about our programs and to donate, please visit the AMF website at austinmusicfoundation.org. We have a lot of great resources there, so please dig in. And you can also sign up to our newsletter and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. I want to say a quick thank you to the Cultural Arts Division for its continued support, and to our amazing supporters, all of our supporters. We really are so grateful to you. And of course, to the AMF team for all your great work in pulling this together. Tonight's workshop is really a continuation of the Time to Pivot series, which AMF launched in late March in response to the cancellation of South by Southwest and the COVID-19 crisis. Our webinars have since attracted over 30,000 views, affirming how essential guidance and continued education is to our community, especially during this pandemic. So, another thing I want to let you know too is, in addition to that, over the past 5 months, AMF has distributed more than $25,000 to local music professionals for consultative and guest speaking services. So we're just trying to do everything that we possibly can to support our community in these really challenging times. So we'll go ahead and move on to the main event. Thank you for those of you who submitted questions in advance. This is an interactive forum, and Natalie will be taking questions throughout the presentation as well. We just ask that you please try to keep everything on topic, and she'll do her best to answer you. With that, I'm pleased to introduce our host, presenter Natalie Fan, founder of SoundSync Music. Hey, Natalie.
Hi. Hey, Jenny.
Hi. Okay, now I can hear you. So SoundSync Music is a licensing and sound design agency that applies local creative forces to unite sound and vision. I love it. I love that description. That's great. So we really want to say that we're so grateful to you for your time and for all of your efforts in helping the community, and really for the opportunity to continue our work together. You've really been instrumental in bringing to the forefront the importance of music licensing as a viable revenue stream for artists here in Austin. And so given the current climate with the touring industry on indefinite hold, artists quite literally cannot afford to leave any money on the table. So it's really imperative that we change the paradigm and work to build up our foundational music industry infrastructure locally. And you are helping to do this. So we thank you for that, Natalie. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thanks, Jenny. Well, first of all, I just wanted to thank you for helping to sponsor our latest Universal Music songwriting camp. And without AMF's help, we wouldn't have been able to do it. So I'm really, really thankful for AMF, and I love events where I can give back like this one. So without further ado, I'll share my slides, which by the way, will be available at the very end of this presentation. I'll give you a couple of opportunities to ask questions. So here we go. All right. So before I begin, I just wanted to walk you through some of the challenges that we face at SoundSync. We're based in Austin, Texas, not LA. So the process of educating artists is extremely important because there are resources that are available elsewhere that aren't available here in Austin. So the first step of this is knowing what your rights are, your copyright, which I'll go over, the basics of. And then I'll explain what music supervision is and what music supervisors do. Next, I'll explain composing songs for sync and how it's different than just composing songs in general. And then I'll also briefly go over some metadata standards that you should absolutely know. And lastly, the most juicy part of this presentation, how to pitch to music supervisors as an independent artist. So again, what you'll learn, basic roles of a music supervisor, what a sync license is, what your basic rights are, the two sides of sync. So what's the difference between the master and a composition? And then how to pitch to a music supervisor and the basic composition techniques in film and TV. So the famous UT alumni, Donald Passman, the author of All You Need to Know About the Music Business, said, "I have seen music screw up more motion pictures than bad directors." That is extremely true. But what is sync licensing? It's anytime your song is united with a visual component. So anytime music meets film, that would be sync licensing. And for an element like that, you need to secure a sync license and a master license. The person responsible for coordinating this is called the music supervisor. And they have the most difficult job in the world. They have to work with the director, select songs for a project, under a limited budget, license both sides of the music, replace any temp tracks that the director might be in love with. If you're a director, don't fall in love with your temp track. There's no way that you can afford something like that. They have to work within tight deadlines. They have to complete cue sheets. So they kind of straddle the thin line between music and film. So they ultimately really are the epitome of the entertainment business. So before we begin, you need to know what your rights are, because if you don't know what your rights are, you won't be able to license your music. You won't know what to license. So the 6 exclusive rights of copyright are the right to reproduce and make copies of an original work, the right to prepare derivative works, so any edits of your song, the right to distribute copies, think Spotify, think distribution, the right to publicly perform your work. So not a lot of artists know this, but if you publicly perform your music at a venue, then you are able to get royalties from performing your own music. And that goes for when other folks perform your music in venues. And then lastly, the right to perform sound recordings publicly through digital audio transmission. Now, what's the difference between a master recording and the composition? So the master recording, you're dealing with recording artists, record labels, record producers, labels, or artists that are being sampled, and then labels which release the soundtrack. On the composition side, you're working with songwriters, every songwriter's publisher, if they have one, PROs, ASCAP, BMI, CSAC, and then songwriters of sampled recordings and their publishers. So when in the music business, not a lot of people know that, or people should know that these two things are two different original works, and both need to be licensed in order to license an entire song. So in order to really understand sync licensing, you need to know the anatomy of your music. You need to be able to say, I'm working with a label. This is the percent of the master that I own. I'm working with a publisher. This is the percentage of the composition that I own. And with those numbers, you need to be able to work out an agreement with whoever's trying to license your music. Now, this is an example pie chart. These numbers are completely made up, but they're not unlike, usual independent record deals. So when you sign with a record label, sometimes they'll take 50%, and then the rest is left to the recording artists. And that includes any of the sampled artists and their labels, your producer. So if you're a producer, next time, be sure you're asking for a couple of points on the record. And then the recording artists. Now this could vary song per song, or you could have a blanket license for the entire record, which is unusual, but happens. The sync covers the composition. Now, when you think of sync licensing, you want to think about the entire song, but technically sync refers to the composition. So if you're working with multiple songwriters, like in this scenario where there are 3 songwriters and each songwriter has a publisher, this is something that your agreement might look like. The splits on the composition might look like this. You know, also assuming that you're sampling a different recording by a different songwriter, you have to pay the publisher and the songwriter of that sample through these splits. All right, so this is the part where I pause for questions. Does anyone have questions about copyright? I'm gonna wait like 30 seconds. So just another note about copyright. It's not completely, you don't have to learn and ingest all of this stuff overnight. I would definitely take my time with it. Make sure that you know what your splits are the minute you finish a recording with the people that you're collaborating with. You don't have to be a songwriter and a performer. You can be a recording artist on your own that records songs that other people sang, or you can be a person who writes those songs, a songwriter. There's no reason you have to do both, but you can if you want to. And if you do any of those things, you really absolutely 100% need to understand your copyright. Okay, so I'm being told that there are no questions. On Facebook, there are a couple of questions on Zoom, so I'm gonna check those out. Okay, so will you get the slides? You absolutely will. Would you categorize mix and mastering engineers into the producer section? I would not. Most of the time, people who mix and master work on a work for hire basis. Does the copyright need to be registered with the Copyright Office? I've got a slide for that. Do I need to copyright my music? Very next slide. Probably if you want to best protect yourself. Even if you don't, the minute you create an original work, you own that work. So whether it's writing down song lyrics or writing the entire song out, scripting it out, or recording it, you own that song. And again, you have 2 original works. You have the song itself, and then you have the master recording. As of 2019, you can't litigate copyright infringement unless you have your original work registered with the US Copyright Office. That being said, if you do it, if someone infringes on your copyright and you end up taking them to court, you can always retroactively file a copyright after the lawsuit, but it can't be decided upon until you do that. And when is a song considered copywritten for sync? The minute you create a song, you own it. You mentioned getting points. Is that just a percentage of the royalties? Yes. Are there ISRC codes included with sync. So that's sort of in the metadata section. I'll address that later. What goes into the composition? Sheet music, lyrics, chord charts? Yes, so everything, all of the above goes into the composition. So the sheet music, the lyrics, the chord charts, it doesn't necessarily have to be written out that way. You could, as long as you have it written down in some way, whether it be like a recording on your phone, or you're writing the lyrics down, or you're actually writing the sheet music for it, as long as it's written in some way, you have ownership of that original work, at least for the composition. Now, how do you copyright original independent produced material? You can go through the Library of Congress for that. It's much cheaper than going through an attorney. Do you have to have officially copywritten your song through copyright.gov? Again, no, you don't. You own a copyright the minute the original work is created, though I would recommend registering your songs. Will you touch upon mechanical licensing? I will in relation to sync licensing, but for the purposes of this workshop, I won't be going too much into mechanical licensing. And I think the mastering and mixing falls under the producer, but I know master is a specific thing that a lot of people do. Yeah, again, with the mixing and mastering, usually sound engineers and mixers and masters, they are hired on a work for hire basis, and they would not be getting points on the record. All right. And I've got a couple more questions here. Do you have to, yeah, okay. All right, I think that that's it for the copyright section. I'll briefly go over some more of these prepared questions and prepared answers that I have. Do I need permission to cover a song? Yes, you need the rights to the composition, but not the master. When you record a covered song, you own the master, but the composition obviously goes to the original songwriters. Now, if you changed it substantially in some way, you can work out an agreement where you can get a percentage of the composition, but often it's going to be just the master that you own. Why is it important to register my music with a PRO? So this is a question that surprisingly none of you wanted to ask. A performing rights organization like ASCAP and BMI, that organization is responsible for facilitating the royalties that go into your pocket. So music supervisors turn in these things called cue sheets, and the cue sheet tells ASCAP or BMI or CSAC, whoever your PRO is, how much money you're owed per every episode that is streamed, per every movie that is bought. You get a percentage of royalties that the song garners. So what's a public performance? This is really important because a public performance for the sake of the explanation of sync licensing is, it's considered every time you perform on a record. So a public performance doesn't have to be performed live, but rather when the music is publicly broadcast as part of a TV show, film, video game, or advertisement, that would be a public performance. And because of that, the PROs are able to pay you out because they're public, they're performance rights organizations. There are PROs outside of ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC, and GMR that you're able to choose from. One is called All Track Performing Rights. I don't have a relationship with them. I just, have heard of them and the good work that they've done. They've built a tech-driven and more transparent version of your average PRO. What's the difference between a licensing rep, agent, and a publisher? So actually this question should be worded differently. You should know the difference between a licensing rep/agent and a publisher, but also the difference between a publishing administrator and a publisher. So for the first question, the difference between a licensing rep and an agent, or an agent and a publisher, are two things. Reps will not usually pay in advance to artists, and then reps are usually limited to individual tracks or songs to pitch, while publishing agreements usually cover any song you write during the term of the agreement. Now, the difference between a publisher and a publishing administrator is that you may already have a publishing administrator. Companies like CD Baby and TuneCore offer their services widely to independent artists. Now, a publisher is different in that if you sign a publishing agreement with someone or a company like Universal Music Publishing, Cobalt, any of the big players, they'll usually pay you in advance. And then their contract, would be, it would cover a certain term, and any song you write under that term would essentially be published by them. They would not only be administering your publishing, but they would be, doing a lot more than what CD Baby and TuneCore would do. That being said, I'm pretty sure that CD Baby and TuneCore have publishing arms. But mostly when people refer to CD Baby and TuneCore, they're talking about publishing admin. Should I sign an exclusive or a non-exclusive agreement? So there's pros and cons for each. SoundSync does both. So we sign both exclusive and non-exclusive agreements with our artists. Exclusivity bars you and any other third party from pitching the songs you have agreed to let your rep license. However, a lot of music supervisors prefer to work directly with agents that have exclusive contracts with their songwriters. Signing an exclusive deal with a rep may motivate them to shop your music. So the pros of having an exclusive contract is that agents like me are more willing to pitch the music, knowing that there's no competition coming from other agents that might be pitching to the same music supervisor. It gets a little iffy with the legal stuff if two people pitch the same song to the same person. That being said, non-exclusive agreements are something that we do at SoundSync to sign music that we believe might fit our catalog, but we don't generally pitch that music unless there's a brief that comes in from a music supervisor that specifically asks for the description of the song that we'll then send them. What's the difference between a work for hire contract and a non-exclusive agreement? When you sign a work for hire agreement, you give ownership of the copyright of your work to whoever hired you, and therefore you're not able to earn royalties for the public performance. In a non-exclusive agreement, you're usually able to retain full ownership of the copyright, which are generally better terms for artists. Now, what kind of income can I earn from a placement? So this is where I'll briefly go over mechanicals. So there are a lot of different streams of income for song placements, starting with the sync fee. The sync fee is earned by the songwriters and the publishers. So again, going back to the songwriters and the people who created the composition. The master use fee is earned by owners of the master recording. That could be your label, or it could be you directly, whoever's recording the music. The public performance royalties earned by the songwriters and the publishers. So this is whenever your song makes it into an HBO drama. Then the music supervisor for that drama will turn in a cue sheet to the PROs, telling them, this is the program that the song belongs to. And every single time there's an episode or movie that airs on HBO, you get a little piece of the pie. And that public performance royalty is earned by the songwriters of that song. Then there's film credit. It's a little bit more indirect as a form of income, but the more songs you get into films, the bigger your resume will be, and it may earn you more placements in the future. And then lastly is the mechanical royalties from streaming. So There have been a couple of articles that I've read recently that say that people tend to discover music through the TV shows and films that they watch. Now, if that's true, then whenever you find a song that you like, you're most likely going to Shazam that song and you'll find out what that song is and you'll add it to your library on Spotify. And every time your song is streamed as a result of the song being in that movie, it earns mechanical royalties just as, all songs earn when they're streamed. AKA it's a side effect of placements. Can unreleased songs be considered for sync? 100%. Can covers be considered for sync? Absolutely. If you want to surrender the publishing of the song to the original songwriters, you can do that. But again, the master will belong to you. So this is great for when music supervisors are working within a budget and they can't necessarily, say that the director married the temp track and really, really wants to use a certain song in their film, but they can't afford it or it's not within their budget. Then using a cover of that song is a solution that kind of works for everyone. Okay, so enough with the copyright and basic questions. I want to move on to the actual licensing and terms that you want to know as you are exploring sync licensing. And I'll pause real quick to see if there are any questions in Zoom. Okay. Do syncs also include video games? They absolutely do. I'll be going over that in this next section. Where do you find sync reps? I'll also go and cover that in this section. What about DistroKid? DistroKid is an example of a publishing administrator. Is there a way to get a copy of these slides? Yes, I will absolutely share these slides happily. Okay, moving on real quick. All right, MFN. As an artist, these 3 letters should be your favorite letters in the entire Latin alphabet, in that order. It means most favored nation. You can apply it to booking contracts or you can apply it to licensing contracts. It states that if a better offer is given to another party, the music supervisor has to come back to you and give you the same or better terms. So for example, you own 25% of a composition of a song. The music supervisor, in order to license that song, needs to work with all of the songwriters and get 100% of the composition and 100% of the master. Now, if someone's asking for more money than you within that pie, then the music supervisor, in order to license a song, has to offer you the same thing that they offer everyone else. And that's what the most favored nation clause is. It's very important to know. It happens very frequently in music licensing, specifically in sync. And if you wanted to apply it again to live music, you can do that. Say you're performing at the Mohawk or any other venue, anywhere in America, you can say, I want MFN, most favored nation, pay me as much as you're paying all the other openers, or pay me as much as you're paying the headliner. Okay. All media now known or hereafter devised. Now, this term came into play as streaming services began to pop up and appear everywhere. So Hulu, Netflix, all of these streaming services really changed the game. Because what happened was that no one ever anticipated the creation of Netflix. And in old licensing contracts, in order to license a song, it always stated the media use that was allowed under the contract. So in the contract, it might say for use in television for the term in perpetuity. Now, what that means is that they can only use that song in television. That doesn't specify Netflix. It doesn't specify Hulu. So the term all media now known or hereafter devised basically means I want to use your song for all media that's known now, but also all media that we don't yet know about. WW, worldwide, this term secures global rights to your music for use in film or TV show. It might also say universal, which means just in all of the universe. Which means if you were using worldwide, you wouldn't be able to license music on the moon. In perpetuity basically means forever or without any end to the term of the agreement. One stop, another really important term, or 200, the alternative term, it means all rights are cleared prior. So SoundSync is a one-stop agency most of the time. Outside of our universal music catalog, we have a catalog, which, by the way, the universal music catalog's shared with Universal, as you've guessed. But all of the music that we have outside of that catalog is one stop, which means that all rights were cleared prior with all of the songwriters. So when the music supervisor reaches out to me to license a specific song, I can tell them that the song's one stop and the only person they need to go through to license the song is me. Oh, and then part of your average contract would be the terms or the duration. So for film, TV, and games, generally for the life of the copyright is for how long the contract would be for. So if you're licensing your song out to a film, TV show, or a video game, generally they're able to use that song for the life of the copyright. I want to note that everything within a sync contract is negotiable. And then when it comes to commercials, it's typically an initial term for 1 year, often with the option for the company to renew for another equal term upon payment of an additional licensing fee. So this usually is the same as the original term, although you can try to negotiate for a higher fee. So for instance, you can negotiate that if they want to use, if they want to renew the song for another year, that they pay you 125% of the original fee that they paid you for the first year. So again, you can get really creative with the terms. Sometimes when I consult filmmakers, they'll ask me how they can afford any of this. And what I always tell them is that if they work directly with the artist, it's really easy to just talk to them about some creative terms. You can work out things like step deals, where, they'll give you the song for something really cheap, say $500 for the first year. And they have that, they have that song for 1 year. And during that entire year, they can say that their use is going to be only for film festivals. There could be a contingency that if the film gets picked up, they get paid X amount of money or X percentage of the revenue. So you can get really, really creative with the terms here. Another, something that you usually see in these contracts is use in media. So again, with theatrical rights, movie makers will want to exploit your music for the term of 1 year within festivals. And sometimes that includes an option to exploit the movie, including your music in all media, which is called broad rights. And then generally, if you're working with TV, the network or cable service will want all media rights. And that's because a TV show can be recycled in a number of different platforms. It could be put on YouTube, it could be put on different streaming platforms, home video, DVD, things like that. So they want to specify that they can use your music in all media. And then there's commercial rights, which is typically, if you're doing a song for commercial, it's typically limited to TV and internet, but the songwriter and artist and the producer, they can try to secure an additional fee use for the commercial on radio. And then lastly is game rights, usually really broad, usually that it's all media now or hereinafter developed. And then lastly would be the territory. Again, this goes back to the location of where the song can be used. So typically for theatrical films and games, it's worldwide use or universal use. In television, you'll see more limited national domestic use, although you can negotiate an additional fee for foreign use. And then in commercials, it depends on the intended audience. This may be limited to local, multiple US markets, national or worldwide, depending on how big the commercial is. So if it's a local commercial, you're probably going to limit the territory to being in Austin and surrounding areas. All right. Pitching to music supervisors. This is the juicy part. All right. I'm going to go after, or I'm going to cover what not to do first, because there's a lot of things not to do when you're reaching out to a music supervisor. First of all, never use attachments. Never, ever, ever use attachments. Always link to your music instead. Send links, especially if it's your first time contacting them. You know, you never want to just bombard someone with an attachment. They get like 100 emails a day, if not thousands every week. So please never use attachments. And then never spam them with follow-up emails. Know when and how often to follow up. So you might want to wait, you know, a couple of weeks. And when you reach out back to the supervisor, try to come at them from a different angle. So just, you know, you can link to a new song that they haven't heard before. You can link to an article that features them in it and just comment something about the article that you found interesting. But don't ever just follow up and say, hey, just following up, have you used my song yet in this film? Because it's more than likely it's not going to get a response. Now, if you follow up consistently with new information and new music, unless they tell you to stop or unless they tell you not to reach out to them in the first place, it's likely that they'll at least get to know your name. Never use samples or cover music you haven't cleared. And that's really important. Because if you use a sample and you don't credit the original songwriter or the original recording artist, you can get into a lot of legal issues. Cover music, it's a little bit more of, you know, knowing that you own the master, but you don't own the publishing. And then lastly, just don't pitch to them if they tell you that they're not taking submissions. Take this very seriously. Most music supervision companies will outright say that they don't accept submissions on their website. So if that is the case, then definitely don't try to dig up their email and try to send it to them anyway. Now, how do you find these music supervisors and how do you build those relationships? My first piece of advice is a little bit unusual. It's to get on Twitter. For whatever reason, Twitter is where all of some of the bigger music supervisors kind of live. It's not uncommon to see a music supervisor post about a project that they're looking for music for. You know, if you make a list full of music supervisors that you're able to just follow, you'll kind of get to know a little bit about their personality, what they like to tweet about. Definitely don't be creepy or anything like that, but make sure that you're knowing a little bit more about them than just that they're a music supervisor. So personalize your message, use IMDb Pro to find their contact information or a variety of other sources, which I'll cover later. Find out what shows they're working on and do not pitch to a show that's been canceled. That's extremely embarrassing. But understand that IMDb might not be up to date. So make sure that you get on Twitter, you're using IMDb Pro, and you're using a lot of other different resources to find out exactly what projects they need music for. You can use websites like tunefind.com to understand what kind of music they've already put within the show and what their style is and what their taste is. I know that when reaching out to music supervisors, you might even want to note something that you've noticed within their music supervision before. So say you've really admired the work of Jen Malone, who's worked on projects such as Atlanta and Euphoria. You can mention, here's an article that I found about you, or an interview that I really liked. Here are some pieces or some songs that I really liked the music supervision for, or parts of movies that I really enjoyed. So just really try to personalize that message. Get involved with the Guild of Music Supervisors. They have a wonderful directory that you can look up contact information for most music supervisors who are part of the Guild. And make sure that you're attending industry conferences like the Guild of Music Supervisor Conference or Sync Summit. There are a number of other ones that are held by PROs like ASCAP and BMI that you can look up as well. All right, metadata and organization. So music supervisors often are really high stress people. They're working under limited budgets. They're working within tight deadlines. Your job is to make their job easy for them. So make sure that your metadata is airtight. Licensing is not a field you can participate in if you don't have attention to detail. So industry standard is, or what's becoming industry standard is disco. What it used to be was Box, but Box wasn't built for music, and disco is. So there's an Australian company called Disco. If you want to visit their website, it's called disco.ac. And you can use this tool to manage your metadata and your music catalog so that you have all of the metadata and information, including the lyrics, the album, the year, the BPM, the writers and what percentages they have, the recording artists. All of that information can be put into Disco, and it'll automatically give you links to the MP3, the WAV, and other different file formats. Organize your catalog so that your songs are easy to search for. So also within Disco, you can place different tags for different instruments, different moods. All of this information is really important to put in your song, because then it'll allow you to search. And not only that, it'll allow the music supervisor to search for your song. So if they're looking up tropical waves, beach songs, then if those words are embedded within the metadata of your song will appear within their database. And usually when they're working within their database, it's either Disco or their email inbox, or it depends on the music supervisor. You want to include keywords to help find, or to help music supervisors search for your music. You definitely want to include lyrics and the genre. And you can be specific about the genre. So if you have like an indie folk pop song, then you definitely want to label it as such. Don't go crazy on the genre. Don't go like post-punk, apocalyptic doom metal. Don't go too crazy with the genres. Like, just rein it in. But I know that it's hard for certain artists to label themselves, which unfortunately is a large part of pitching your music, which is why your agents will do it for you. Okay, so include lyrical themes and moods, include all the basic information, contact information, super important. How are they supposed to contact you if they want to use your song? All of the songwriter information, which includes PRO affiliations, publisher information, and IPI numbers, and of course the title and the artist of the song. And when applicable, if it's a released song, then you want to include the album as well. Again, going back to one stop. To get a better chance for a response, make sure that you include one stop or non-union in your email subject lines. Of course, only if it's true. If you're part of a union, then you definitely want to tell them that as well. But if you are non-union, it can be somewhat of an advantage, because union fees can be kind of a lot. So some music supervisors that are working under a budget might want to look for a non-union song. And then many supervisors prefer using these non-union artists because, a number of different reasons, but mostly because of the budget. Now, if you're listening to all of this and you're saying, none of this is for me, I don't know what I'm talking about, first of all, do your research. It's not as hard as it looks, I promise. Or consider getting an agent, looking for an agency to rep your catalog. If you're a composer strictly for film and TV, you can find an agent to represent you and find you work. If you're in a band, you can find a publisher or a licensing representative to pitch and plug your music. For my filmmaker friends out there, the rule of thumb is that if you're creating film and creating the budget for it, make sure that you are dedicating 5 to 10% at least of your budget to music licensing. If you're an indie filmmaker and your budget's under $1 million, then make sure that you double that number and make it 20%. Music's expensive. And then further within this deck, I have different licensing resources. And like I've said a number of times, this slide deck will be available to you. I'll make sure of it. I'll give it to AMF to give to all of you fine folks, the 250 of you that RSVP'd. Recommended reading. If you want to learn more about sync licensing, then I definitely recommend Thinking in Sync by Amanda Creek Thomas. She's the music supervisor for a number of different projects, including American Horror Story and, it's mostly American Horror Story and Glee and things like that. But she wrote this excellent book. It's easy to flip through and finish within 30 minutes to an hour. It is basically a basic, succinct brass tacks version of any of these other books. So Music Supervision, the complete guide to selecting music for movies, TV, games, new media. That's a little bit, more in depth. And then if you really wanted to dig down deep into all of the music business, look into Donald Passman, who again is a UT alum. He created this book that is now known as the Music Bible. And then the Brabeck twins wrote a book together called Music, Money, and Success, which is also a very, very thick book. What's really important is to stay in the loop with all of the music industry news. So I'd highly recommend subscribing to Variety, Billboard, and then checking out IFPI's Global Music Reports. They come out with one every single year. And RIAA also has several different resources on their website as well. If you're looking for information on music supervisors to pitch to, again, you might want to join the Guild of Music Supervisors. Start there. They have a whole directory of music supervisors and their contact information. And then look into Songwriter Universe. They also have a catalog of different sync agencies and different music supervision agencies that you can contact. Music Connection has something similar on their website, which is free. And then some of these other sites, IMDb, if you subscribe to IMDb Pro, you can find a little bit of contact information for some supervisors. Sync Tank and Recording Artists Guild have great articles that you can learn more about sync licensing on. Okay, so I'm going to pause here. I know that you might have a lot of questions, so I'm going to dig into those questions real quick. Okay, so start from the top. There's a lot of questions. All right, so going back to MFN, Mama Duke, shout out, fantastic songwriter and rap artist in Austin, just up and coming. She's asking, I can bring up MFN to a booker that offered me, say, $200 to pay me what they did the headliner. Obviously, they can just choose to take me off the bill. Yeah, so it's more of negotiating. I don't think that I've heard of any artists using MFN in booking in Austin, but I know that it can be used and some bookers do use it. Okay. Greg Mobley, are sync licensed songs considered a public performance on films like they are on broadcast television networks? Yes. So anytime your song is performed, not live again, I'm talking about streamed or included in a video, that would be considered a public performance. And then licensing for theater or Broadway, I haven't had to do that yet, but I'm pretty sure that ASCAP and BMI are involved in licensing for theater and Broadway as well. Is it common to have, just about the theater stuff, it might be considered a live performance, but I would have to double check that information. That's not necessarily sync licensing. Now, is it common to have someone pitch on your behalf for a fee? Okay, well, here's the thing, guys. You can pay a fee and be included in someone's catalog. It might be a fee like $15 a month or something, which I've seen before. But unless they're getting you the results that you want to make sure that it's an organization that has some sort of credibility. And you want to make sure that you read the contract very thoroughly. If not, give it to an attorney to look over. So I wouldn't say that it's common, but I would say that there are libraries out there that you can add your music to for free, or a fee that you can pay to be included in certain catalogs. But SoundSync doesn't charge a fee to the artists. Okay, I heard from an NBC Universal Music supervisor that he prefers downloads and that links to Spotify is a drag. That a lot of the times is easier for him to have the download to send to his team. It may, it may be reliant on who the music supervisor is, but I can tell you that the majority of music supervisors don't want attachments. How do you figure out what supervisor is working on a project prior to post-production? Well, you could look into, this is why you have to pay attention to music industry news. A lot of the time, the cast and crew will be announced for certain productions and projects, and you want to kind of keep a close eye on what's being made. I love Jen Malone. I also love Jen Malone. I'm a huge fan of hers. She has this fantastic story that's actually, I think, is in an article somewhere, but I got to hear it from her, in that she said that once she had to go, she was asked what the hardest song she's ever had to license was. I don't remember what the song was, but she did mention that she had to go to a prison in order to get the artist to sign off on the song. So yes, their job is very hard. I noticed that music supervisors tend to preference their taste in music and like stuff that is very unique and out there a lot of the time. I would say I'd agree with that for sure. Where would I find in BMI's metadata system to include themes, moods, and lyrics to have this to be pulled in their system? So the metadata that you're editing most likely won't be in BMI, though in BMI, I know that there are certain fields that you absolutely should fill out. What I mean by metadata, though, is the information that's embedded in the actual song file that you're sending out to music supervisors. So, this would be edited within iTunes or any other service that you may be using. I recommend, again, Disco, which is just made for sync licensing and for music supervisors and agencies like SoundSync. Are you able to use a pseudonym? That's an exciting question, and I'm excited to answer it because yes, you're absolutely able to use a pseudonym. And I would actually encourage that because if you're an artist, say a rock artist, and you're talented in multiple ways and you decide that you're going to try to make a song for sync in the genre of, let's say, jazz. And that's not really what you're known for. And you don't really want to put out the song, the jazz song, though it's pretty unlikely that a project would license jazz. But anyway, if you put it out under a pseudonym, you're still able to pitch that to different music supervisors under that name. A lot of bands in LA actually have virtual, they have virtual bands that aren't necessarily real, but they make sync music under these names. Do music supervisors use pre-made/existing music, and how often does a non-composer get asked to create original music for a production? So, if they're under a budget, I'd say that using a service like MusicBed would be pretty, you know, it would definitely be within their wheelhouse. However, if you're talking about like a music supervisor who is hired to work on a film, more than likely they have a budget to pay artists, and so they'll be seeking songs from independent artists that aren't necessarily on libraries. And you don't have to be a composer to be asked to create original music for a production. In fact, whenever there's a brief that isn't necessarily under like a strict timeline, a brief that we don't have a song for, I'll go and ask certain artists to try to compose a song for the brief if they want to. Do you have any advice or tips for someone looking to get into music supervision? I always tell people that trying to be a music supervisor and not living in LA at least once in your life would be like being a politician for the US government and never going to Washington, D.C. It's just not done. You have to get out to LA and meet these music supervisors in person, intern for them, try to get as much experience as possible, even experience in the sync departments at different labels or publishers would be really helpful in advancing your music supervision career. Making music is not my full-time job. It's a hobby or passion for the time being. Do you ever see people like me getting into this business? Absolutely. Anyone can make music for sync. Well, not everyone. You have to be talented, obviously. But that being said, there's no reason that just because music isn't your full-time job that you can't do it. So the disco website again is disco.ac. It's an Australian company, which is why the .ac part. Would it also be helpful to live in LA to get into music composition for productions? Yeah, I would say though that because we live in a digital era, that a lot of post-production and music composition still happen in LA, but you're seeing more and more composers live all over the United States and all over the world. Okay. All right. That's the end of the questions. Oh, one last question. Where do we look for what music supervisors are looking for? And again, this would be IMDb Pro or any of the resources that I stated earlier in this slide deck that you'll be able to find once you get your hands on the deck. Okay. Great. Now, here's the fun part, actually making music for sync. Although that comes with some bad news. I get a lot of music that's being sent to me, and I love the majority of it because I just love Austin music. Unfortunately, there are certain criteria that you have to maintain in order for it to be considered a syncable song. Now, that doesn't mean that the songs that you've already created aren't syncable. There might be a very niche market for the use of that song. But if you're trying to get an agency to represent you, then you need to produce syncable music. And here's what that means. The lyrics need to be broad. So the lyrics need to be broad enough to apply to multiple scenarios. Keep it conceptual. You can have metaphors in there as long as they're not extremely image driven. Romantic love songs often don't do well for sync because they're too narrow in theme. The only thing that you can use a romantic love song for is a romantic scene. So think about that when you're creating music for sync. If you write a love song, consider writing about a general type of love, like love for your family or your friends or other things. Keep it clean. Explicit songs are difficult to sync, which excludes a lot of different genres of music. Fortunately, you can always pitch your instrumental backing tracks. And don't use samples, just don't. just please stay away from samples if you want it to be considered a syncable song. A lot of the time, the effort that goes into securing the license to even have a sample is just too much trouble for an agency like SoundSync to pursue. Now the song has to be absolute fire, and it has to be like extremely syncable for us to want to work with you to be able to clear that sample. A strong hook is a key to a great song. This is extremely important. If your song doesn't have a hook, then that would exclude you from going after deals within commercials. And commercials often bring in the most amount of money. So keep that in mind. If you're deliberately writing a song to be in sync, then it needs to have a strong hook. Okay. So themes and motifs are often used in music. These are for more of like the composers that are listening to this webinar. Themes and motifs are used to symbolize the relationship between two or more characters in a motion picture. So for example, Pixar does it really well. I won't play the video right now because we're running a little bit short on time, but if you have two characters, in a Pixar movie, oftentimes you'll hear the same music play for those two characters whenever they get together. And that is used to symbolize the relationship between the characters in a movie. And then you need to know the difference between elemental and diegetic sound. So elemental sound is sound that doesn't originate from the film's world. So that means any backing music that comes in during like, a montage or something. Diegetic sound can be on or off screen, but it comes from the source within the picture. So if, for example, in Stranger Things, if they're turning on the radio and they hear an 80s song come on, then that is a source from within the film itself, within the own storyline, and that's called diegetic sound. Layering instruments. So elemental sound is music for sound that's added for effect, while diegetic sound can be on or off screen, but comes from the source of the picture. Oh wait, I just said that slide. Okay, well, layering instruments, here we go. Layering instruments, if you're composing for a film or a TV show, as you're layering on different instruments, it'll build up it'll build up to the climax of the movie. So you want to make sure that it starts thin and then it gets a little thicker as you're progressing towards a focal point. Musical textures are important too if you're composing for film. Low sounds are perceived by the human mind as big and scary, like a lion's roar. High sounds, like a little mouse scuttling around a Christmas tree, that's perceived by the human mind as small and delicate. So if you combine low and high sounds, that's perfect for horror movies, because then you're creating cognitive dissonance. The mind doesn't know what to believe. If you have a low bass sound combined with, say, the high sounds of a violin, it creates a lot of the time, what you would find in The Shining. And then again, layering instruments and melodies can create thickness in musical textures. It builds towards the climax. It adds tension. So you want to start with a thinly textured sound, and then you build on it to build up to the climax. And then I won't go through all of this, but it'll be available to you if you look through the slide at the end. So again, I just have a couple of resources listed here in the slide deck. Lastly, if you want to get a hold of me, you're always welcome to send me music. However, I will say that I don't accept submissions. I will listen to the music and I'll give you feedback if you want me to, but I don't accept submissions. But there's my contact information if you want to reach me. I am extremely approachable, I'd like to think, and I'm happy to work with as many people as possible. You can also follow me on Twitter. Like I said, you should get on Twitter to follow different music supervisors. Here's my personal Twitter account, my SoundSync music account, and then lastly, if you want to follow my dog, he is also on Instagram. All right, and I think that that is the end of this webinar. I'll get to the last few questions that we have. Do music supervisors prefer full band recordings or can it be acoustic? It depends on the project. It's important that while you're working within the metadata of the song, that if it's an acoustic recording, that you want to say that within the title and within the tags that you have. So again, you want to describe the song as much as possible without the person having to hear the song. When you're pitching to music supervisors, it's important, almost imperative, that you let them know what you sound like. So include reference points like other bands, which I know artists hate comparing themselves to other artists, but in sync licensing, if you're pitching, it's absolutely, it's going to put you over the edge, and they'll pay more attention because then they'll get a good inkling of a feeling of what you sound like. Going back to copyright, is it possible to copyright several songs and pieces as a collection? I think that you can copyright a whole album and quite possibly an EP as well. You don't have to do every song individually, I think. Better for soups, SoundCloud link or Google Drive link? I would say SoundCloud's better than Google Drive because a lot of the time Google Drive is weird about permissions. Unless they specifically ask for a Google Drive link, which I will a lot of the time because I work within Google. So what someone had brought up earlier was that, one of the music supervisors she or he has met said that they prefer getting attachments. If you know that about a music supervisor, definitely do it, but always assume that they don't want links. I produce mostly instrumental music, but I also learned about the stems. So it is a good idea to add some vocal without option for instrumental or the vocal versions. So yes, if you produce music, it's always great to have stems on deck whenever the music supervisor asks you for them. It's also great to have a cappella versions, which is vocal only, or instrumental versions ready. What are your thoughts on samples from places like Splice or other paid membership services? I would say that, it's become pretty normal to use Splice samples. I'd say that look into the terms and conditions. But it really depends on what the sample is coming from. Most of the time it would be royalty free, so you wouldn't have to worry about licensing those samples. Okay, all right. A few more. I'm a composer. How do you recommend getting an agent? See, that's the tricky part. You have to be in LA and you have to, well, you don't have to be in LA. You can contact agents while in Austin, especially during a time like this when travel is not advised. I'd say contact as many agents as you can, send them a professional email, don't bother them too much with follow-ups. Make sure that you are following up, maybe three weeks to a couple of months at most. Let's see, can I still pitch to music supervisors if I'm living outside of the US? Does it matter? Yes, you can pitch to music supervisors wherever you live. Make sure that if you're outside of the US that you research what performance rights organizations are within your country. Okay. Do we need to go to the AMF website later to get a copy of the slides? I'll make sure that they make it available in some way. Is it better to pitch to a supervisor for a specific project they're working on, or pitch a song for them to potentially use in the future for any project they may be working on? Um, well, it really depends on the music supervisor. If you know that they're working on a specific project, then you might want to cater to that project. But if you can't find what they're working on currently, but you know that they're still engaged, then that's when you can pitch a song, or a couple of songs. I'd limit it to 5 songs. Usually I only put in 3 when I'm reaching out to a music supervisor. And that first connection with that music supervisor is going to be really important as well, because um, you want to be able to introduce yourself and give them a good idea of what kind of music you're able to make. So yes, Austin Music Foundation says slides will be on their website. All right, got a couple more questions here. Where would I find in BMI's metadata system to include themes? Okay, I've already gone through that. What tips do you have for musicians headed to Sync Summit for the first time? What can an artist get out of that experience? The most important thing to think about when you're at conferences is just to meet as many people as possible and follow up with them, connect with them on some level on social media. Twitter makes it really easy to just follow people. And, it doesn't have to be like a check-in every couple of months via email, although, I mean, if you want to build a relationship, then that can probably be a good idea if they're feeling that. But following them on Twitter and just staying in the know of what's happening and what projects they're working on is just as important. Let's see. All right. Do music supervisors and the like care about what you look like or whether you have a strong social media presence? I don't think that they care what you look like. I think that they just care what the music sounds like and if the lyrics are broad enough to place in a film. That being said, having a strong social media presence is always a good thing, because if you're working with an independent filmmaker, sometimes if they're trying to market their film, it's a good idea to have someone who's somewhat well known within the community, whether it be local, state, or just national or international. It's always a plus to have a song from a musician that is somewhat well known or has some sort of marketing pull. How has the pandemic impacted music supervision since production for shows and movies have been halted? Yeah, so productions really, they're going in a more animated direction. They're not filming shows right now in Hollywood, at least not without the proper protections, and a lot of them have halted production completely. So in a couple of months, you're going to start probably running out of things to watch, unless you really, really just love animated dramas and comedies. With that being said, though, I think that if we get past the pandemic quick enough, there won't be that much time to where there will be much of a lag in production. Now, with that being said, they're still filming commercials. People are still filming or making video games. There are a lot of different streams of revenue that you can still tap into. Okay. If you release a different genre of music under a pseudonym, does that affect how you register those songs with your PRO? Not necessarily, because your legal name is always going to be the name that's attached to your PRO. So BMI or ASCAP, they'll always ask you for your legal name and most likely your social security number. And by the way, in the US, you can only be a part of one PRO. So it's unlikely that a pseudonym would prevent you from registering your songs. Additionally, if you're a member of different bands, which many are in Austin, you're going to have different band names anyway. All right, cool. Any other questions? I think I ran out finally. Those are a lot of questions. Let me go back to um, the screen that had all of my contact information on it, just in case you guys want to grab that. And yeah, if you have any other questions about sync licensing, I may not know everything, but I know a lot. And I'm always happy to work with artists, independent artists. Part of, what I addressed earlier were the challenges of being in Austin and not LA, where everyone's pretty savvy. Now, the challenges include people sending music that isn't necessarily syncable. So the best thing that you can do for yourself is to learn, first of all, the basics of copyright, learn what makes a song syncable, um, start creating music that, it might go under a different pseudonym, but start creating music that has a hook, that is somewhat upbeat, because upbeat songs do a lot better than slower music, slower tempo music. And try to have some sort of pop element, try to collaborate also with different songwriters, both in Austin and outside of Austin. Don't just pigeonhole yourself to the city. Try to get out there as much as possible. You'll be surprised who's willing to work with you outside of the city, even bigger producers in LA and bigger songwriters in LA. You might want to reach out to as many people as you know and start collaborating, because you never know who might have connections to someone important. And yeah, that's pretty much it. If I were to go through this entire slide deck, it would probably take me 3 hours. So I appreciate you guys hanging in there, because I know that copyright can be kind of dry. But I hope that this workshop was really helpful. And again, I want to thank the team at Austin Music Foundation for having me. Always, everyone stay safe. I know that it's a crazy time period with the pandemic and with everything going on right now. But I appreciate you guys giving me the time, and please always reach out with any questions that you may have.